Hi, everyone. Can I just check if you guys can hear me okay? Great, awesome. We'll just give some students a couple more minutes, then we can start. All right, I think that should be good. Leading up to this session, I was told that Sarah will be joining us today to support on the lecture. I don't see her on the participants list. Anyway, she's planning on joining us today, so if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to drop it on the chat box, and she should be able to answer any questions that you might have in regards to the study. All right, I think we should get started. So the topic for today is chemical control of the brain and behavior. Can I get you guys to confirm that you guys can see my screen okay? Great. We'll start then. So if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to email me. My email is on the first slide. So the objectives of this session is what's depicted on this slide. So firstly, we'll describe and label the functional areas of the hypothalamus, list the relevant hormones, and describe the secretory functions of the hypothalamus, discuss the two main divisions of the autonomic nervous system. So this is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic arm of the nervous system. We'll also describe the neurotransmitter in the autonomic nervous system, describe how the diffuse modulatory system of the brain exert its effects, particularly with the structures noted here, the locus coeruleus, the raphe nuclei, the substantia nigra, ventral tegmental area, and the basal forebrain complex. So just to give you guys an introduction, the neuronal organization is important in establishing the communication lines between neuronal cells. This can be specific, where there is a synaptic space between two neurons that allow for specific communication to appropriate areas in the postsynaptic cell. This could also be done through an expanded area, which can occur in various ways, including neuronal transmission through the autonomic nervous system, There's also the neuronal transmission and the release of hormone by the release of chemical messengers into the bloodstream. And lastly, you have the system called the diffuse modulatory system, which has a specific source in the brain with expanded influence in other areas of the brain. This is something that we will discuss later on in this lecture. To be able to understand the source of the chemical control of the brain, we need to delve into the source of this control, which is the limbic system and its individual structures. The limbic system is a structure sitting just beneath the cerebral cortex and above the brainstem. This structure is important since it acts as a link between higher cognitive functions, the vegetative functions, and also more primitive emotional responses. It is important to note that the hypothalamus is a structure within this system, which plays a huge role in the neuroendocrine control of motivational drives and also emotional behavior. Now, the hypothalamus is located just inferior to the thalamus. As the name suggests, hypo means below or underneath. Therefore, it's called the hypothalamus. This structure forms the walls of the third ventricle, and this structure is connected to the pituitary gland by a stalk called the infundibulum. Okay. Although the thalamus and the hypothalamus are close in proximity, their functions differ greatly from one another. It has been shown that any defects in the thalamus was associated with a lack of feeling, having a blind spot, discrete sensory and motor deficits. This is due to the fact that the hypothalamus acts as a relay area for sensory information that come and go into and out of the cerebral cortex. The deficits in the thalamus on the hypothalamus, on the other hand, is very different from the thalamus, although they are confined in the same area. In this case, when you have disruptions or deficits in the hypothalamus, this often leads to the fatal disruption to the body, which can ultimately lead to an individual's death. When we look into the hypothalamus more deeply, the structure can be broken down into three functional zones. You've got the lateral area, the medial area, and the periventricular zone. For the purpose of this lecture, we'll delve into the periventricular zone more as opposed to the other areas. Now, the periventricular zone receives input from other areas, including the brainstem and the telencephalon. And the periventricular area contains neurons with varied functions, including the suprachiasmatic nucleus that plays a role in modulating our circadian rhythm. We also have the periventricular cells that modulate the response of the autonomic nervous system. And also the periventricular cell also plays a role in modulating our control of the viscera as well. And the last one on this slide looks at the periventricular neurosecretory cells that modulate the secretion of hormones in the bloodstream. So this last part in the slide talks about the coverage of the nervous system on the endocrine system. Now, the function of the hypothalamus also involves the activation of the neurosecretory cells, which extends to the pituitary gland. A good analogy here is to imagine the pituitary gland as a mouthpiece to the hypothalamus, where it uses the pituitary as a means to communicate with the rest of the body. The hypothalamus modulates somatic and visual responses in accordance with the needs of the brain and environmental stimuli or change. In the grand scheme of things, the hypothalamus is crucial for maintaining homeostasis, which regulates our physiology via neuroendocrine secretions in response to changes in the external environment. This includes modification in our physiology, which includes body temperature, blood pressure, blood composition, and pH. In the case of blood pressure, having too high of a blood pressure is not good for you. And conversely, when you have a blood pressure that's too low, it is also not good for you. So if you have a high blood pressure, you're termed as hypertensive. If you got too low of a blood pressure, then you're termed as hypotensive. In the case of being too hypotensive, you tend to risk not having enough pressure in your circulation that allows for your circulatory system to distribute blood to the rest of the body. And the way our body is haywired is that our body is optimized to make sure that blood pressure is adequate enough to distribute blood all over the body, including the glands and our organs. Okay. And in this case, when it comes to the hypothalamus playing a role in homeostasis, it makes sure that our physiology works in a way that it maintains it at an optimal level. So we've just had Sarah Lull joining our call. So I'd just like to introduce her as the subject coordinator for this subject. So she'll be supporting us today in the chat and also letting people into the lecture.
Thank you, Fahd. Hello, everyone. It's Associate Professor Sarah Lal, your subject coordinator for this session for neuroscience. I'm hoping that you're all enjoying the subject so far. We've had some very good early feedback score from the students who participated in the survey. And I believe you're all enjoying the interactions with Taryn and Luke and Fahd as well. Taryn, I believe, has been a gem for a lot of you. So I hope it continues like that. Thank you very much for having me, and I shall be supporting the lecture on chat room as well. Thank you, Fahd.
Not a problem. Thank you. All right, moving on to the next slide. So on this slide, you can see a diagram that the pituitary gland is divided into two sections. You've got the anterior lobe and also the posterior lobe. The posterior lobe is part of the brain, wherein axons in the hypothalamic neurosecretory cells extend to, and these neurons release two hormones. So you have oxytocin, and you also have vasopressin. Vasopressin is also known as the antidiuretic hormone. Oxytocin is important in lactation, and release of oxytocin also leads to the inhibition of the hypothalamic function. The antidiuretic hormone, on the other hand, regulates blood volume and salt concentration. Both of these hormones are generated and stored in the posterior pituitary. When required by the body, this is released into the circulation. Although the hypothalamus plays a crucial role in the control of fluid balance and maintenance of blood volume, it is important to note that the kidney also plays a role in driving this balance. On this slide, you can see that when the blood volume or pressure goes down, renin is produced in the kidney. Okay. This sets off the renin-angiotensin cascade, which produces angiotensin II, a vasoconstrictor that increases blood volume, blood pressure, sorry. When this mechanism is activated, the telencephalon subcortical cells detect the change and stimulate the hypothalamus to secrete antidiuretic hormone. And this hormone stimulates the facultative reabsorption of water in the kidney's distal convoluted tubules, and thus increasing blood volume and also the blood pressure. The lateral hypothalamic cells play a role here to stimulate thirst and drinking behavior. So when you find yourself really thirsty and raiding the tap for a glass of water, you would know that this is due to the activation of these cells in the lateral hypothalamus. Moving on to the next lobe of the pituitary gland. This is controlled by the parvocellular neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamic ventricular area. These cells do not have extending axons, but secrete hypophysiotrophic hormone into the portal circulation, originating in the floor of the third ventricle. Okay. Releasing hormone or trophic hormone travels to the anterior pituitary and binds to the receptors. This activates the cells to secrete and stops. This activates the cell to secrete or stop secreting hormones into the circulation. Examples of these hormones include the adrenocorticotropic hormone, which targets the adrenal gland, thyroid stimulating hormone, which targets the thyroid gland, growth hormone, which targets all cells in the body, and follicle stimulating hormone, which targets the ovary and the testes. A good example to demonstrate the function of the hypothalamus is to look at the body's stress response. In this case, the periventricular hypothalamus secretes corticotrophin-releasing hormone into the portal circulation in response to stress. From here, the anterior pituitary will release the adrenocorticotropic hormone, which binds to the receptors in the adrenal cortex. And this mobilizes energy and enables us to cope with stress. This could be stress felt when you're stuck in a jungle, for example, and seeing a vicious animal in front of you, or even just doing regular exercises in the gym. These scenarios require your body to use energy and cope with the onset of stress. It is important to note that the cortisol released can also cross the blood-brain barrier. Therefore, it can have an influence on the brain, resulting in a negative feedback effect on the hypothalamic function. As noted earlier in this lecture, the periventricular zone also modulates the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is an extensive network of neurons widely distributed inside the body cavity, which works automatically without conscious control. The autonomic nervous system is divided into two parts. So you've got the sympathetic nervous system and also the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for mediating our fight or flight response, which results in increase in heart rate, blood pressure, depressed digestive functions, and mobilization of our glucose reserves. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, is responsible for mediating digestion, growth, immune responses, and energy storage. The symptoms associated with parasympathetic division includes slowing of the heart rate, a fall in blood pressure, increased digestive functions, and the inhibition of sweating. Outside of the autonomic nervous system, you have the presence of the somatic motor system. So this system has a single but also crucial function in innervating and controlling skeletal muscles. Without the somatic motor system, we are not able to execute our voluntary movement and action. And because of this, it is associated with voluntary action because it sits outside of the autonomic nervous system. It is associated with voluntary action. So this slide looks at the innervation of both arms of the autonomic nervous system. What's obvious here is the pathway of the innervation from both arms of the autonomic nervous system, which differs between each other, okay? So the sympathetic nervous system has preganglionic axons emerging from the thoracolumbar outflow, which is the mid 1/3 of the spinal cord, okay? On the other hand, the parasympathetic nervous system has the preganglionic axons emerging in the brainstem, okay? And also the sacral spinal cord. And this area is called the craniosacral outflow. It is important to note that the arrangement of these two systems indicate how complementary they are from one another. So in terms of the traffic of information that goes into the periphery, they tend to use different routes. All right, so the sympathetic preganglionic neurons lie within the intermediolateral gray matter of the spinal cord. From here, axons go through the ventral roots and synapse on neurons in the ganglia of the sympathetic chain next to the spinal column or within the collateral ganglia of the abdominal cavity. The parasympathetic preganglionic neurons sit within the brainstem nuclei and also the sacral spinal cord. In this case, the axon travel in the cranial nerves as well as the nerves of the spinal cord. It is important to note that this pathway tends to travel farther than the sympathetic axons, and the ganglia here sits next to or on or near the target organs. In this slide, it is also important to note that the differences between the two arms and how the neuronal circuitry is actually arranged in this system. So just to give you guys a summary, the autonomic nervous system innervates the secretory gland, heart, and blood vessels. It also innervates the bronchi of the lungs as well. This system also regulates the digestion and metabolic functions of the body. It also regulates the function of the kidney, urinary bladder, large intestines, and also the rectum. The autonomic nervous system has been shown to be quite essential for sexual responses of the genitalia and also the reproductive organ. And lastly, it interacts with the immune system. In the case of situations where people face crisis or being at rest, during moments of crisis, there is an increased activity in the sympathetic nervous system and a decreased activity in the parasympathetic arm. However, when the situation is reversed during moments of rest, the opposite occurs where there is an increased activity in the parasympathetic nervous system and a decreased activity in the sympathetic arm. So this next section looks at the enteric division of the nervous system. This system is also referred to as the little brain of the autonomic nervous system. This is because it has a great deal of independence and controls many physiological processes. just to give you some context on the enteric nervous system, it approximately has the same number of neurons as the spinal cord itself. The system is located and lines the esophagus, stomach, intestines, pancreas, and the gallbladder. It is mainly composed of two networks. So you've got the myenteric or Auerbach's plexus, and you also have the submucous or the Meissner's plexus. The function of the enteric division is to control the physiological processes involved in the transport, enzyme secretion, and also the digestion of food. The enteric division receives input from the brain via the axons of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. The control of the autonomic nervous system comes from the hypothalamus, more specifically the neurons in the periventricular zone, which sends information to the brain stem and spinal cord nuclei to modulate its effect. Another center for autonomic control is the nucleus of solitary tract. It is known to have vegetative functions, which are functions that keeps ourselves alive. It is also involved in sensory information from internal organs, okay? In this case, a good example to propose is the taste information from the tongue. Studying neurotransmitter and the neurotransmitter systems in the central nervous system has been proven to be quite difficult due to the presence of the blood-brain barrier. However, this limitation is not really present when it comes to studying the neurotransmitters in the autonomic nervous system, which is confined outside of the blood-brain barrier. In the next few slides, we will be highlighting what we know about the neurotransmitter in the autonomic nervous system. Firstly, looking at the preganglionic neurotransmitter, the primary neurotransmitter is acetylcholine for both sympathetic and parasympathetic arm of the autonomic nervous system. This is the same neurotransmitter that is used in the skeletal neuromuscular junction. The acetylcholine binds to the nicotinic receptor and from here evoke fast excitatory postsynaptic potential in the postsynaptic cell. It has been demonstrated that ganglionic acetylcholine can do more than the neuromuscular version, wherein the ganglionic acetylcholine can bind to muscarinic receptors that are metabotrophic in nature. In this case, it means that it binds to a G protein coupled receptor, it binds to a receptor that activates the G protein coupled receptor, okay, which can produce downstream effect in the postsynaptic cell. The ganglionic acetylcholine binding to muscarinic receptor leads to the generation of excitatory postsynaptic potential and also inhibitory postsynaptic potentials. Eventually, the response that you get here would be generation of small excitatory postsynaptic potentials. In addition to acetylcholine, you also have the presence of neuropeptides, such as neuropeptide Y and also vasoactive intestinal polypeptide. These polypeptides interact with G protein coupled receptors that can trigger small excitatory postsynaptic potentials. It is important to note that these effects mediated by these neuropeptides are only modulatory, which means that they are not enough to trigger an action potential in the postsynaptic cell. What it does, however, is make the cell more responsive to an action potential so that when this cell gets activated, it is more likely to generate an action potential. The postganglionic neurons are responsible for stimulating autonomic motor activity, which is represented by glandular secretions, contraction, and relaxation of sphincters. The neurotransmitter here vary from preganglionic neurons, where the parasympathetic arm release acetylcholine, while the sympathetic neurons release noradrenaline or norepinephrine. Differences between the two is associated with their effect. One has a more local effect in the case of acetylcholine, while the other has more of a systemic effect in the case of noradrenaline or epinephrine. Studies in this area allowed us to predict the effects of drugs that interact with the cholinergic and the noradrenergic systems, which are termed as parasympathomimetics and sympathomimetics. The parasympathomimetic mimic or promote muscarinic actions of acetylcholine or inhibit actions of norepinephrine. On the other hand, the sympathomimetic actually mimic or promote norepinephrine actions or inhibit muscarinic actions of acetylcholine. The diffuse modulatory system is defined as a collection of neurons with widespread patterns of axons. If you look back to slide 3 of this lecture, you can see the type of connection it has in different areas of the brain. This system is vital given that its effect on motor control, modulation of mood, memory, and also metabolism. There are 4 main systems in the diffuse modulatory system, which includes the noradrenergic, serotonergic, dopaminergic, and cholinergic systems. Each system has its own origin and targets in the central nervous system. They all share a common principle, however, including being composed of a small set of neurons at the core, having these neurons arising from the brainstem, having one neuron influence many others, and lastly, you have synapses from these neurons release neurotransmitter molecules into the extracellular fluid, which diffuses to many neurons that are not confined in the synaptic cleft. Therefore, these systems are referred to as the diffuse modulatory system. In these 4 systems, they each use one of the following neurotransmitter. So you have the noradrenaline or norepinephrine, you have serotonin, dopamine, and also acetylcholine. These neurotransmitters activate specific metabotrophic receptors, which in turn activate G protein coupled receptors to mediate the effects of the neurotransmitter. The function of each diffuse modulatory system is driven by how electrically active they are and how much neurotransmitters are available for release. So the first system is the noradrenergic system. So you have a structure called the locus coeruleus, which is a tiny blue spot in the pons. Okay. This bilateral structure and the axons extend out to every part of the brain, which makes the connection diffuse in nature. This system innervates the cerebral cortex, thalamus, hypothalamus, olfactory bulb, cerebellum, midbrain, and the spinal cord. The role of this system is to regulate attention, arousal, sleep-wake cycles, learning, memory, anxiety, pain, mood, and lastly, brain metabolism. This system is said to be activated by the experience of new, unexpected, and non-painful sensory stimuli. The next system is called the serotonergic system. So this system stems from the 9 Rafe nuclei, which lie on either side of the midline of the brainstem. Similar to the noradrenergic system, this extends out to many areas of the brain, as you can see in this diagram. Similar to the noradrenergic system, as the name suggests, this system only produces serotonin as its neurotransmitter. And together with the noradrenergic system, they play a role in the ascending reticular activating system. This system has also been demonstrated and has been shown to be involved in the sleep-wake cycle, as well as mood. The selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor medications are used to elevate mood by prolonging the effects of the serotonin neurotransmitter in the synapse. And in addition to that, we also seek food as a means to elevate our mood. So in this case, you have foods with tryptophan, which is a precursor to serotonin. And when you ingest high levels of tryptophan, this would make this neurotransmitter more bioavailable, okay? Similar to noradrenergic system, they are activated by novel, unexpected, and non-painful sensory stimuli. All right, so the next system is the dopaminergic system. So the dopamine generated by the system is a crucial central nervous system neurotransmitter. This system arises from 2 structures. So you have the substantia nigra, okay, and also the ventral tegmental area. The substantia nigra projects to the striatum, which is demonstrated to be important in the initiation of voluntary movements. Deficiency in this structure were shown to result in the onset of Parkinson's disease. And the treatment associated with Parkinson's include the introduction of a substance called L-DOPA. It is important to note that the dopamine, as it is, cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. Therefore, in terms of alleviating the effects of Parkinson's, physicians tend to use L-DOPA, which is wherein L-DOPA is known to be the precursor version of dopamine. So by introducing L-DOPA into your system, it can cross the blood-brain barrier and make dopamine more available in the brain. The other area is the ventral tegmental area, which extends to the telencephalon or the cerebrum. The dopamine system is important in the activation of the reward system, and this could be demonstrated in cases where we have specific addictions that drive our behavior. So alcoholism and gambling addiction as well, as examples. So the final system that we have in this lecture is called the cholinergic system. This involves having scattered cholinergic neurons in several related nuclei in the core of the telencephalon, medial and ventral to the basal ganglia. The best known connection for the cholinergic system is a medial and septal nuclei, which innervates the hippocampus and the basal nucleus of Maynard. The role of this system is not particularly clear. However, it has been shown to be associated with learning and memory. You also have a structure called the pontomesencephalotegmental complex, which acts on the dorsal thalamus. This regulates excitability of the thalamus sensory relay nuclei. So there are many psychoactive drugs that were found to be interfering with the chemical synaptic transmission. In cases of many drugs of abuse, these can act on the modulatory system, particularly for the noradrenergic, dopaminergic, and the serotonergic system. Examples include the lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. You also have psilocybe mushroom and peyote cactus. These are hallucinogens that are close to the structure of serotonin. And in this case, this can bind to serotonin receptor in the serotonergic system. When you have that outcome, it tends to activate the downstream effect of the serotonergic system. The other bit is stimulants, which in this example is depicted as cocaine and amphetamines, which can interact with the dopaminergic and the noradrenergic system. This triggers the reward systems and associate itself with addictive behaviors and the onset of the sympathetic nervous system activation. So this results in symptoms of fight and flight response. So I believe this is the second last slide. And this looks at how these drugs interferes with the system in a diagrammatic format. So in this case, you have cocaine and amphetamines, okay? And what they do is they tend to block the reuptake mechanism used to eliminate the signals of the neurotransmitter. This is seen in both the noradrenaline and also the dopaminergic system, okay? And the resulting effect is the prolonged presence of the neurotransmitter in the postsynaptic cell, which continuously activate the postsynaptic cell. So just to conclude, the brain interacts with the rest of the body through 3 channels. So you've got the secretory hypothalamus, which leads to the release of hormones, the autonomic nervous system, which has the neuronal innervation all over the body. And you also have the diffuse modulatory system, which is a network of neurons that fans out all over the brain. Each of these perform different functions in the body and altogether maintain brain homeostasis. Furthermore, the activation of these channels allow and regulate our behavior in our day-to-day activities. And with that, I'm happy to conclude the lecture and go through some of your questions in the chat box if there are any. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them before the hour is over. Okay, no new questions in the chat box, but feel free to add in any questions that you guys might have. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions offline if you guys send me the question by email.
Hello everyone, it's Sarah again. I just thought I'd take the opportunity while you're thinking of your questions, just thought to take the opportunity to explain to you that we're just about to announce the structure and format of the anatomy exam that will be coming up online. So it will be a set time exam and we intend all the questions to be multiple choice. Similarly, the final exam will be coming up later online. I will put up the information and we will confine the final exam to an LMS timed exam, which means you get a certain amount of time during the day to complete your exam online. And once again, it will be multiple choice questions. If you've got any further questions about any of your assessments or any of your exams, please don't hesitate to drop myself an email or Taryn or Fad for that matter. And we've also got Luke. And I'm hoping that you're enjoying the subject with the team we've got on board at present. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Fahd.
Do we have a question for Sarah on the chat box?
So I'll reply to that.
Okay, sure.
Thought to pipe in again for a minute. Don't hesitate to drop us emails, please, if you've got any queries. If you're struggling during the COVID teaching environment, if there's something that would assist or help you along with your learning, please don't hesitate to let the team or myself know, and we'll try to accommodate it as best as we can. Thank you. Yep.
Yep. We have another question in the chat box.
Yep, I'll answer that.
Great, thank you. Right, I think we'll give people a couple of minutes to send in their questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer any calls via email if you guys come up with any questions in the future. I'll see you guys next time.
Thank you all, and thank you, Fahd.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. I think I'll close the session now.
Thank you.
And yeah, I hope you guys have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.